Hey guys, tonight we begin with something special. This is a journey into a quieter corner of the past, a place where stories aren't loud with battles or victories, but soft with the rituals that came before an ending. Here history doesn't shout, it murmurs. It hums like a secret kept too long, curling through time like smoke through candlelight. So before we drift into this gentle labyrinth, take a moment to like this video and subscribe, so that these forgotten mysteries can travel a little further, finding others who might need a calm way to rest. And in the comments, tell me where you're listening from, and what time the night has reached you. It's always fascinating to imagine those quiet lights scattered across the world, each one of you listening in stillness, connected not by sound, but by silence. Now, let's close our eyes and listen for the first whisper. There was a time before the word spy was ever spoken, before ink dried on parchment, before kings built palaces or empires drew borders. There were whispers, soft, trembling whispers carried by wandering feet across deserts, forests, and oceans. They carried messages no one was meant to hear. Secrets that could crumble thrones and build others in their dust. In the silence of ancient nights, long before cities glittered under torchlight, leaders learned something darker than the edge of a blade. Knowledge, hidden and unseen, could wound far deeper than any sword. And so, in the earliest corners of civilization, a new weapon began to take shape, not forged in fire, but in silence. It began in the temples of Sumer, where priests murmured to clay tablets, inscribing not prayers but coded truths. Grain tallies, troop numbers, trade routes, information too precious to be spoken aloud. Clay became the first cipher, a simple mark, a secret message. A world that realized that to hide truth was to hold power. In the courts of pharaohs, messengers walked barefoot across golden halls, their tongues trained to tell only half-truths. Beneath the gaze of gods, they learned that survival lay in silence. One misstep, one slip of a word, and the crocodiles in the Nile would feast. Egypt became a kingdom ruled not only by kings, but by watchers, those who listened more than they spoke. Poisoned perfumes and coded hieroglyphs began to move through the corridors, small tokens carrying the weight of betrayal. Across the sea, in the dusty plains of Mesopotamia, clay seals bore hidden symbols that only the chosen could decipher. Traders and emissaries carried scrolls written in ink that vanished with sunlight. Every word, a fragment of a secret world, an invisible battlefield where no sword was drawn, yet lives were wagered all the same. In China, the whispers took form in silk and shadow. Imperial couriers carried messages stitched into garments, their meaning known only to the emperor's eyes. The art of war taught that victory belonged to those who knew their enemy's heart, a truth sharper than steel. Spies were not warriors, but shadows that slipped between worlds, leaving no footprint behind. They carried powders that could silence a man in sleep, blades hidden within scrolls, and knowledge that could tilt empires toward ruin. Further west, in the marble courts of Greece, philosophers debated truth and illusion. But beneath the songs of poets and the words of scholars, the city-states played their own quiet games. A hollowed-out cane might carry a sealed message. A trusted servant might be a double voice. Even in the birthplace of reason, deception grew like ivy around marble columns, unseen yet ever present. And in the sprawling heart of Rome, where armies marched and legions thundered, the deadliest soldiers were often those who never lifted a sword. The Romans called them speculatores, watchers, disguised as merchants or slaves, slipping through enemy ranks. They carried poisons laced into rings, daggers concealed within sandals, and tongues sharper than any gladius. Their task was not to conquer, but to listen and to silence. In those early centuries, the first spy weapons were not machines or tools, but gestures. A whisper behind a curtain, a letter written in lemon juice, revealed only by flame, a vial of venom small enough to hide in a ring. The world was beginning to understand that the deadliest strike could come without warning, without noise, without blood. As centuries drifted, these whispers wove themselves into the fabric of history. Every empire, every kingdom, every quiet ruler learned the same truth. To rule was to know was to watch. And to watch meant to arm oneself not only with soldiers, but with secrets. In dimly lit rooms, scribes mixed inks that disappeared at dawn. In monasteries, monks encoded messages within psalms, singing warnings in plain sight. In distant deserts, assassins carried words written on the skin, erased with a single touch. 1,000 small inventions, born not of glory, but of fear. Fear of being seen, fear of being known. There was a strange kind of poetry to it all, the dance between silence and survival. The art of killing not with violence, but with whispers. The early spy learned that a poisoned cup could end a dynasty, and that a single misplaced word could ignite a war. And so, they crafted their tools with care, not just to kill, but to conceal. Rings that released venom with a twist. Fans laced with powders that could choke a breath. Letters whose true meaning was hidden in the shape of their folds. Objects of beauty, carrying death in their shadows. But these were more than weapons. They were promises. Quiet, trembling oaths sworn to unseen masters. They whispered of loyalty and treachery, of truth buried beneath lies. Each one a thread in the tapestry of human cunning, woven tighter with every passing century. Over time, these quiet tools began to multiply. In the courts of Persia, silken cords strangled in silence. In the palaces of Byzantium, messengers drank wine laced with dreams from which they never awoke. In the narrow streets of medieval cities, apothecaries brewed draughts that left no mark, no wound, only absence. A world learning, always learning, that the most dangerous weapons are the ones no one sees. And somewhere, in the dark corners of every palace, someone watched. A figure standing just beyond the torchlight. Eyes sharp, hands steady, carrying a message that could change the world, or end it. The story of the spy weapon begins here, in this quiet dusk between truth and illusion. It is a story written not in blood, but in ink that fades, in footsteps unheard, in shadows that move when no one is looking. And as the centuries turned, these whispers would become things of metal and smoke, tiny daggers hidden in pens, perfumes that carried death, bullets that made no sound, but all of them, every strange invention, would trace its lineage back to this silent dawn, when secrets first took shape, and the world learned to kill without being seen. So the shadows grew longer, the tools grew sharper, and in the hush between heartbeats, the age of silent weapons began to awaken. From the hush of hidden scrolls and whispered codes, the shadows began to sharpen. What once lived in quiet words and unseen messages soon found its voice in metal, cold, deliberate, and merciless. When secrets alone could no longer shape the fate of kings, hands reached for blades, and a new kind of silence was born, one carved by assassins, those unseen architects of death. They did not march in armour or raise banners. They moved through crowds like wind through reeds, unseen and unremembered. They did not seek glory, nor leave their names etched in stone. Their legacy was written in vanishing breaths and empty thrones. The first of them walked the corridors of empires like ghosts. In Persia, silent blades gleamed beneath flowing robes. The court of Darius and Xerxes shimmered with gold, but beneath its brilliance coiled suspicion. A cup could be poisoned. A servant's hand could tremble with hidden intent. Even a trusted messenger might carry death within his sleeve. In a world where secrets weighed more than armies, a single whisperer with a dagger was worth a legion. To these men of shadow, the dagger was not a tool of rage, but of design. Its purpose was not chaos, but precision. To end a lineage, unseat a rival, silence a truth. In their hands, the blade became a pen, writing the fate of nations in strokes too swift to see. In Egypt, whispers spoke of blades forged with venomous oils, their edges kissed by the essence of serpents. The wound itself would be small, barely felt, a fleeting touch beneath torchlight, yet within moments the blood would turn cold, the breath slow, and the eyes still. No sound, no struggle, just the soft collapse of a body and the echo of sandals retreating into the night. Further east, in the courts of India, kings and courtiers played their games of loyalty and betrayal with artistry. Assassins trained in the silence of temples learned to blend devotion with death. They crafted daggers hollowed at the hilt, filled with toxins drawn from jungle plants, poisons that took hours to bloom, leaving their victims dying with confusion, never knowing the moment the blade had spoken. Death became a slow confession, whispered only to the shadows. The Greeks, too, shaped their silence in steel. In the tangled politics of city-states, where alliances changed like tides, betrayal was a currency as common as silver. A blade hidden beneath a cloak could speak more convincingly than 1,000 speeches. And in the quiet aftermath, philosophers would debate the nature of justice, even as another dagger was already being sharpened. But it was in Rome that the art of the poisoned dagger reached its cruel perfection. In the Senate's marble halls, every glance carried weight, every meal a gamble. Rings bore hidden needles, cups were sipped with trembling hands. Emperors rose and fell like waves upon the shore, each toppled not by armies, but by shadows. A servant's hand, a lover's kiss, a blade drawn in silence. The Romans understood the language of fear. They wrapped their daggers in silk, dipped their points in poisons brewed from hemlock and belladonna, and let them speak where words could not. A ruler's power was no longer measured by his soldiers, but by how long he could sleep without looking over his shoulder. The dagger, once a simple weapon, became something sacred. It was not a soldier's tool, but a scholar's, an artist's. Assassins studied anatomy, learning where a cut would silence breath in an instant. They studied poisons, blending alchemy with cruelty, learning which venom left no trace, which left a message. To kill was not enough. The act itself had to vanish, leaving only the echo of inevitability. In distant Persia, legends spoke of a sect hidden among the mountains, the Hashashin. They were not mere killers, they were instruments of ideology, their blades moving like whispers through the politics of the Middle Ages. Under starlit skies, they crept into enemy strongholds, crossing walls unseen, leaving their mark upon the pillows of kings. Their message was always the same: we can reach you. Their dagger was not just a weapon, it was a sentence, a warning, a prayer whispered in steel. To the world, they became myth. To rulers, they were dread made flesh. And with them, the poisoned dagger became more than a tool of death. It became the voice of silence, the language of control. But for every dagger drawn, there was a counter. Kings built walls higher, trained tasters for every meal, trusted no one, loved no one. Yet still, the shadows found their way in, through the smiles of courtesans, the loyalty of servants, the devotion of disciples. No fortress could defend against a hand that moved in darkness, against a kiss that burned with venom, against a gift wrapped in kindness but laced with death. The assassins were not only killers, they were architects, building empires not with stone, but with fear. Their blades shaped history as surely as battles, though no bards sang of them. Every empire that rose carried within it the echo of a silent strike, the memory of a ruler who fell not in war, but in a whisper. Through centuries, the art evolved. Poisoned rings gave way to hidden blades, garments stitched with death, walking sticks that concealed fangs of steel. Each invention spoke the same truth. Silence was power, and death, when unseen, was the most eloquent of messages. The poisoned dagger was not simply a tool of murder. It was the soul of espionage, the first true expression of warfare fought in shadows. It taught the world that victory did not always roar. Sometimes it arrived quietly, in the stillness after a single, perfect strike. And so the world changed. From the temples of Persia to the palaces of Rome, from the mountain citadels of the Hashashin to the secret courts of the East, a pattern emerged, a dance between silence and death, knowledge and fear. In that dance, new instruments would soon be born, weapons hidden not only in blades, but in letters, perfumes and smiles. For once the world had learned to kill in silence, it began to search for ever more delicate ways to whisper death into existence. The dagger, once glinting in shadow, began to fade into subtler forms. The age of assassins had taught the world its lesson. The deadliest weapon is not the one that strikes hardest, but the one that no one ever sees. When the blade grew too loud, the hand turned to parchment. Where steel could not pass, words could slip unnoticed. And so the dagger, once dripping with venom, found its echo in ink, soft, fluid, silent. It was here, upon the fragile skin of paper, that death learned a new language. Letters no longer carried mere thoughts or affection. They carried judgment, betrayal, and silence. In the still rooms of courts and monasteries, where candles burned low and the air hung heavy with wax and whispers, the art of writing began to hide its second purpose. A letter could cross borders a soldier never could. It could sit in plain sight, waiting, smiling in polite ink while death slept between its folds. The earliest masters of this craft understood that messages could wound as surely as blades. In the palaces of Persia and Byzantium, scribes were taught not only to write, but to conceal. They mixed inks with the juices of citrus and milk, writing truths that vanished in light, revealed only by the kiss of flame. In one glance, a love poem. In the right hands, a map to an ambush, an order for execution, a promise of revolt. Each line a quiet strike, each word a weapon. But the written word offered more than secrecy. It offered delivery. A letter could be more than a message. It could be a vessel. In the hands of spies, it became a trap disguised as trust. Couriers carried folded sheets laced with venomous dust, powders drawn from deadly blossoms and minerals ground fine as ash. A single touch, a fingertip brushing the greeting, and the message claimed its reader. Eyes blurred, breath slowed, and the letter lay open beside a body that would never speak again. In the courts of Renaissance Italy, such letters became tools of diplomacy. Rulers and cardinals traded couriers like chess pieces, each wondering if the next parchment bore alliance or annihilation. The Borgias, masters of deceit, were said to seal their messages with wax infused with hidden toxins, a kiss of death pressed by an unwitting thumb. The elegance of it all was its simplicity. The deadliest weapons were now folded neatly into envelopes, carried by servants, sealed with care. Across Europe, as kingdoms rose and fractured, alchemists and spies began to blend their arts. They experimented with mixtures that could hide words for years: copper sulfate, vinegar, urine, the smoke of candles. A page might seem blank, a harmless sheet carried across borders, until a careful hand held it over flame and watched invisible sentences bloom like bruises. Whole wars whispered through these vanishing messages, plots to betray kings, to sink fleets, to crown impostors. The parchment itself became a battlefield, each line a maneuver, each hidden mark a strike. Yet there were letters more sinister still, those that did not wait to be read. In the Age of Enlightenment, when curiosity turned to experimentation, chemists discovered new poisons: mercury, arsenic, phosphorus, powders so light they could be dusted between pages. They clung to fingertips, slipped into breath, lingered in the lungs of the curious. A scholar might open a missive from a distant ally and find himself fading before the words reached his eyes. Even knowledge, it seemed, had become a weapon. By the time empires stretched their banners across oceans, invisible ink was no longer a secret art, but a science of statecraft. Spies trained in candlelit chambers learned to write in citrus and cobalt, to weave codes into poetry, to hide commands in margins and signatures. A line of verse might tell an army when to march. A flourish of a pen could order a king's death. And the paper itself could carry death in its fibres, letters soaked in slow poisons, their scent masked with perfume, their ink a harmless lie. In the salons of France, nobles exchanged scented notes, never knowing which breath might be their last. In the courts of Russia, Tsars received reports bound in silk, their edges treated with powders that burn the skin and numb the blood. In London's fog, agents of Crown and Counter-Crown traded blank sheets heavy with secrets. A war of silence fought across desks and couriers' satchels. There was a strange grace to it all. No clash of steel, no echo of gunfire, only the soft rustle of paper, the flicker of a candle, the faint smell of citrus and ash. It was war whispered through ink and folded corners, each message a breath away from revelation or ruin. As centuries turned, the letters grew more cunning. During the great wars that scarred the modern age, nations built whole departments devoted to invisible words. The British mixed ink from cobalt salts, the Germans from sympathetic chemicals that could only be seen with rare reagents. Messages crossed seas in novels and postcards, waiting for the right eyes to coax their meaning from nothingness. Censors opened thousands of envelopes, searching for the faint shimmer of deceit, yet the deadliest often passed unmarked. A poem to a sweetheart, a note from a friend, a sentence that turned armies. But not every message sought only to be read. Some sought to erase. In laboratories hidden behind steel doors, chemists crafted inks that carried toxins, novelties of death that spread invisibly. A letter could sit on a desk, harmless until its reader reached to unfold it. Then the unseen particles would rise, a silent cloud, and the message would deliver its truest intent, not in words, but in silence. The pen had learned to kill as quietly as the dagger once did, and in doing so, it reshaped the landscape of power. No longer did rulers fear only armies at their borders. They feared the courier's knock, the sealed parchment on the table, the letter bearing their name. Through these silent exchanges, a new understanding took root, that the most dangerous knowledge was not what was spoken, but what was hidden between the lines. A world that once trusted letters as tokens of love and alliance began to see them as masks, delicate, perfumed, and deadly. And still, in dimly lit rooms, the ink flows. Hands move over parchment with care, writing words that fade, that wait, that wound. For in every age there are messages meant not to enlighten, but to erase. Their beauty lies in their calm, their horror in their silence. The assassins who once walked with daggers now sit at desks, their weapons bound in ribbon and sealed with wax. Death no longer comes from the shadows of alleys, but from the folds of envelopes and the glow of candlelight. A single stroke of ink, a single hidden word, and the world shifts once more. In these letters that kill, the line between knowledge and destruction blurs to nothing, and history learns again that even the gentlest hand holding a pen can wield a weapon unseen. In the quiet, after the ink had dried, when letters carried death in their folds, another transformation began. The hand that once dipped its quill in secret mixtures turned to metal and gem, seeking new ways to hide its intent. If words could whisper, then objects could deceive. And in the dim light of royal courts and silent workshops, artisans and spies began to weave death into beauty, crafting weapons so elegant they passed for ornaments, so subtle they could rest upon a hand or glimmer softly at a throat. It began with curiosity, the question of how to carry silence upon the body. A dagger was too loud, a vial too fragile, but a ring, a brooch, a walking cane, these could travel anywhere, cross thresholds where swords were forbidden and guards too trusting. The world learned that danger need not look dangerous. It could sparkle, it could shine, it could be mistaken for a gift. In the palaces of the Renaissance, where elegance was armour and conversation a battlefield, nobility wore jewels that told stories, but some told darker ones. Goldsmiths, sworn to secrecy, carved tiny chambers within their works. A ring that caught the light in a ballroom might also hold a droplet of venom. A clasped brooch might spring a needle sharp enough to pierce skin, laced with quicksilver or nightshade. In these halls of candle and silk, a gesture of affection could be a sentence of death. Courtiers, ever watchful, began to see beauty with suspicion. The hand extended in greeting, the jewel worn too proudly, the blade that never gleamed, each could conceal a secret purpose. The art of disguise was not only a craft, it was a philosophy. To survive, one had to learn to look beyond appearances, to question the softness of gold, the stillness of a smile. In Italy, master smiths perfected the anello velenoso, the poison ring. Its lid was seamless, its hinge invisible to the eye. A twist of the finger, and the chamber opened, releasing a droplet that could turn wine into silence, or food into farewell. Princes carried them as insurance, assassins as calling cards. A ring could mean devotion or doom, and no one could ever be sure which. Further north, in the shadowed courts of France, ladies wore pendants filled with perfumes. Some carried fragrances of jasmine and rose. Others held mixtures brewed in secret, drawn from aconite and wolfsbane, scents that delighted the senses and sickened the blood. A gentle embrace, a whisper at a masked ball, and the poison would do what no army could. But not all disguise was meant for intimacy. In distant lands, travellers carried walking sticks carved with hidden blades, their handles hollow and weighted. Merchants wore buckles that could spring open into knives. Monks kept rosaries strung with capsules of cyanide. Every object was a question. What is true, and what is hidden beneath? In the East, artisans elevated this deception to an art. In the courts of the Mughal emperors, jewelers created rings that concealed blades no larger than a thorn. Worn by nobles as symbols of grace, they could turn in an instant into instruments of revenge. Some bore inscriptions in Sanskrit, prayers to gods of mercy, engraved upon weapons meant for death. A contradiction the world has always known, that beauty and cruelty often share the same face. In Japan, where elegance walked hand in hand with discipline, the samurai carried kogatana, small blades hidden within the sheaths of their larger swords, or tucked into fans, combs, and writing brushes. The ninja went further still. Their disguises were masterful, weapons woven into everyday tools, needles concealed in ornaments, powders carried in hollowed coins. A marketplace could become a battlefield, and the deadliest strike might come from a gesture mistaken for courtesy. Through these centuries, the art of disguise whispered a single truth, that the weapon unseen was the weapon most feared. A blade strapped to the thigh could be parried, but a blade hidden in a ring, a clasp, a necklace, these were ghosts in plain sight, invisible until too late. In the salons of Enlightenment Europe, where reason was worshipped and elegance refined, the tradition continued. Inventors and watchmakers turned their skills toward secrecy. Pocket watches hid tiny pistols. Canes unscrewed to reveal slender blades. Snuff boxes released clouds of sleeping powders. Each trinket was a riddle, a balance of craft and cruelty. Even the devout were not untouched. Crosses worn upon the breast might open to reveal compartments of poison, or messages written in invisible ink. Faith and espionage intertwined, each cloaked in sanctity, each whispering their own truths. But perhaps the most haunting beauty lay in the simplicity of it. A ring upon a hand, glinting in torchlight. A fan waved gently across a room. A clasp fastened at a throat. Each gesture innocent, each movement graceful. Yet behind it, the cold precision of design, the intent to end a life without noise, without struggle. In these objects, humanity revealed its strange genius, the desire to conceal destruction within elegance, to blend cruelty with art. Weapons once forged in fire were now shaped in silence, disguised as affection, faith, or vanity. They carried not only death, but doubt, for no one could ever truly trust what glittered before them. And so, in courts and corridors, suspicion became the constant companion of power. Every exchange, every gift, every touch bore weight. The smile of a stranger, the offering of a drink, the jewel upon a rival's hand, all became possible preludes to disappearance. As the centuries moved forward, and machines began to hum where artisans once whispered, this art of hidden death did not fade. It merely changed its form. Blades became mechanisms, rings became triggers, and elegance gave way to utility. But the lesson endured, that the deadliest weapon is often the one that pretends to be harmless. For in a world built on appearances, disguise became the ultimate weapon. And in the shimmer of gold, the glint of steel, and the silence of trust betrayed, history continued to write its darkest poetry, one secret hidden inside another, waiting to be discovered too late. From the shimmer of gold and the whisper of hidden blades, the world drifted into a new fascination, one not merely with concealment, but with illusion. If death could hide within elegance, then perhaps it could move behind gears and mirrors, disguising its hand not in silk, but in mechanism. It was an age that began to trust in machines, in contraptions of brass and glass that promised wonder, and in that wonder, danger found a new disguise. The courts of Europe filled with marvels, automata that bowed and danced, boxes that played music without touch, mirrors that shifted light like magic. Every invention was a trick, every motion a deception, and as craftsmen shaped toys for kings, spies, and alchemists watched with quiet admiration, seeing in these gears the possibility of a deadlier art. The hand that wound a clock could also set a trap. In dim workshops, behind the clatter of hammers and the hiss of bellows, new creations took shape. Machines built not for wonder, but for silence. A walking cane that fired a hidden shot, a snuff box that released a sleeping vapour, a book whose spine concealed a needle's sting. Each device crafted to vanish into its setting, to draw no gaze until its purpose was fulfilled. Deception became architecture. A room might hold secrets within its walls, panels that slid at a touch, drawers that swallowed messages whole, mirrors that reflected lies. In the palaces of intrigue, where plots were woven like tapestries, such devices were both refuge and weapon. The difference between survival and discovery could be a single false step upon a floorboard that did not creak. The art of the spy began to intertwine with the art of the engineer. Blacksmiths learnt to forge more than swords. They shaped locks that answered only to hidden keys, blades that unfolded from innocuous forms, rings that triggered traps far from the wearer's sight. Metal became language, each mechanism a sentence written in silence. In the courts of the Enlightenment, where reason reigned and curiosity swelled, the appetite for invention became insatiable. But curiosity has always been twin to danger. What could amuse a king could also end a rival. And so, behind the parlour tricks and drawing room marvels, a darker craftsmanship blossomed, one that turned toys into traps, delight into demise. A simple inkwell might hold more than ink. Press a hidden stud, and a spring would release a cloud of choking smoke. A pocket watch, gifted in friendship, might conceal a vial of mercury, ready to shatter with a twist. The mechanisms were precise, delicate, and utterly without mercy. Across the empires, agents carried these curiosities like talismans. In Russia, courtiers wore brooches that concealed needles tipped with belladonna. In Vienna, diplomats exchanged boxes that played lullabies and released soporific fumes. In the salons of Paris, mirrors were hung not merely for reflection, but to watch, to listen, their backs fitted with hollow chambers where notes could be hidden, or eyes could peer unseen. Smoke and mirrors, the tools of illusionists and assassins alike. Each served the same master, misdirection, to let the gaze wander while the hand struck unseen. It was not enough to hide a weapon, now the weapon had to lie. To pretend it was something it was not, harmless, ornamental, even delightful, until the moment it whispered its true intent. In the Far East, artisans perfected their own symphony of mechanisms. Lacquered boxes with shifting panels, dolls that concealed blades, fans that sprayed clouds of powder fine as mist. The beauty of these objects was their greatest defence. No one suspected danger in a song, a mirror, a smile. And as trade routes stretched across continents, these curiosities travelled with them. The East India ships carried spices and silks, and hidden among them, devices of intrigue, gifts for ambassadors, tools for spies, trinkets for kings, all bearing the same truth. The line between art and weapon had vanished. It was an age enchanted by reflection. Mirrors adorned chambers and corridors, each promising truth but offering distortion. In their depths, plots ripened unseen. Behind their glass, small compartments waited, filled with letters, poisons or coins stamped with invisible codes. The mirror became a symbol of espionage itself, shining with one face, hiding another. The illusion grew deeper with time. Alchemists turned chemists, chemists turned machinists. The pursuit of knowledge, once noble, began to serve shadows. A bottle of perfume could hold a gas that clouded memory. A lantern could burn with a flame invisible but deadly. Even light itself became a trick, bent through lenses to mislead the eye. And still, the world applauded. The courts marvelled at clever inventions, oblivious to the purpose humming beneath. The magician bowed, and the audience clapped, unaware that the same hand that conjured wonder could conjure ruin. For in these centuries of invention, mankind discovered something profound, that the greatest deception was not to hide a weapon, but to make it adored. The assassin no longer needed to stalk the shadows. He could stand in the open, his tools glittering in plain sight, a watch, a cane, a trinket. He could kill not with force, but with fascination. The whispers that once spoke through blades and letters now spoke through clicks and springs, through reflections and gears. And as the world's eyes turned toward progress, its hands grew more cunning. Every innovation, every marvel, carried a question unspoken. Was it meant to amuse or to destroy? In the haze of smoke and the shimmer of mirrors, truth became elusive. No one could trust the object before them, not the gift, not the smile, not the gleam of a lens. Illusion had become a weapon, and trust the first casualty. Yet within this deception lay a strange beauty, the poetry of precision, the artistry of silence. For even as death hid behind clockwork and crystal, the hand that shaped it did so with devotion. A craftsman's pride, a spy's patience, a killer's calm, all woven into the ticking heart of a machine. And so, the age of mechanical deception unfolded, a world where nothing was as it seemed, and the deadliest strike came not from the dark, but from the very light that dazzled the eye. In this new theatre of shadows, where smoke veiled truth and mirrors whispered lies, the weapon was no longer just an object, it was the illusion itself. The hum of gears and the shimmer of mirrors gave way to the sound of waves. As kingdoms turned their eyes toward distant horizons, the age of illusion slipped into the age of exploration. But while ships carried the banners of glory and trade, beneath their decks travelled something quieter, the machinery of espionage. It was a time when maps were treasures, when a coastline glimpsed in the fog could mean power beyond measure. Secrets were no longer kept in chests or chambers, but in the stars, in the winds, in the hands of navigators whose charts could shift the fate of empires. And where there were secrets, there were spies. The oceans became theatres of deception. Sails billowed with ambition, but hidden among the crew were eyes that watched and hands that copied. Letters, folded in the language of merchants, carried messages for kings. A ship's manifest might list spices and silks, but tucked within, a ciphered note whispered of fortresses, fleets, and hidden harbours. Empires learned quickly that conquest was not only forged by sword or cannon, but by the quiet theft of knowledge. A new kind of weapon was needed, one that could survive salt, storm, and scrutiny. And so, the craftsmen of courts and ports turned their skill to invention once more. The age of exploration birthed new tools of silence, compasses that concealed compartments, telescopes with hollowed shafts for scrolls, sextants carved to carry microfilm long before the world knew the word. Each gadget served the same promise, to carry truth unseen. On the docks of Lisbon, sailors carried pendants shaped like crosses. Inside, a drop of venom for emergencies no prayer could answer. In the harbours of Venice, merchants clasped rings that bore not only gems, but tiny flints to spark smoke, to burn maps before capture. Even the sailors' charts themselves, drawn on layers of wax and linen, could be washed away in water, leaving only blank parchment behind. The age of exploration was an age of mirrors, not only in palaces, but across the seas. Every empire reflected another's hunger, another's fear. Spain sought the secrets of Portugal. France whispered through the courts of England. The Dutch watched them all, patient as the tide. Espionage became a silent trade wind, pushing ships and destinies alike. In candlelit chambers of royal courts, spy masters unrolled maps, not to plan journeys, but to plant eyes. They sent agents disguised as merchants, missionaries, and map makers, men who charted coastlines by day and copied fortifications by night. Some carried hidden instruments, a compass with a false bottom, a scroll tube lined with thin lead to dull the edge of daggers, a coin that split in two to reveal a sliver of code. Even curiosity became a weapon. Naturalists who sailed to gather plants and stars often gathered more: whispers from foreign ports, sketches of harbours, lists of ships anchored under rival flags. Their journals, filled with ink and wonder, hid lines written in lemon juice, visible only under flame. But it was not only knowledge that travelled. So too did poisons, crafted from the same flora explorers claimed for science. Seeds that could sicken livestock, herbs that slowed the pulse, powders that numbed the tongue. The same ship that carried cinnamon and cloves could also bear death, wrapped in silk and labelled as spice. Across the colonies, messages took on new disguises. Knots tied in rope spoke of routes and rendezvous. Shells arranged in certain patterns marked safe harbours, and in the folds of maps, invisible inks traced paths not for sailors, but for spies. For the empires that rose on trade could fall just as swiftly to betrayal. A single intercepted chart could cost a fleet. A single whispered coordinate could doom a colony. The instruments of navigation became instruments of deceit, and every gadget, however innocent, carried the weight of suspicion. In the courts of Europe, invention continued. Boxes shaped like Bibles hid compasses. Rosaries counted not prayers but signals. Hourglasses flowed not with sand, but with mercury, their gleam a secret code. Every tool became a cipher, every object a message in disguise. The spies of this era were travellers and scholars, not assassins. Their blades were quills, their battlegrounds libraries and harbours. Yet their work was no less perilous. Caught between kingdoms, many vanished at sea, their secrets swallowed by the waves, their inventions buried with them. Still, the hunger for advantage grew. As maps filled with ink, so did the margins with lies. Islands drawn where none existed. Coastlines shifted to mislead. Cartography itself became a weapon, its beauty masking deceit. A rival who followed the wrong chart might find only reefs and ruin. And so the world expanded, not just in distance, but in deception. The compass needle, steady and sure, became a metaphor for loyalty, always pointing true until a hidden magnet turned it astray. Trust-like direction was fragile, easily altered by unseen hands. As explorers traced the edges of continents, the spies traced the edges of trust. And in their wake, a new kind of weapon took root, not forged in iron or tempered in fire, but crafted from knowledge, patience, and cunning. It was a weapon invisible, yet sharper than any blade: information. From the decks of ships to the corridors of palaces, the age of exploration revealed not only the vastness of the world, but the depths of human secrecy. Every discovery brought new eyes, new listeners, new tools. The compass, the sextant, the telescope, instruments of wonder, now bound to silence and subterfuge. The world had grown larger, but the shadows had grown longer. And in those shadows, among the scent of salt and spice, the gadgets of empire clicked and whispered, devices of curiosity turned to quiet violence. As the sails of empire settled upon distant shores, and the whispers of exploration drifted back to the old world, the courts of Europe glittered anew. Marble halls echoed with music, canvases bloomed with colour, and chandeliers scattered light like constellations across polished floors. It was the Renaissance, an age of rebirth, where beauty promised truth, and yet behind every painted smile, intrigue ripened like fruit in shadow. In this era of grace, death learned to wear a finer face. Steel still gleamed in alleys, and blades still whispered in the dark. But in the palaces of Florence, Venice, and Rome, a new kind of weapon took form, one that killed not with noise, but with elegance. It was an age when velvet hid venom, and silk concealed silence. The art of killing had become a craft of sophistication. Courtiers raised their goblets to toast alliances, while powders dissolved unseen into ruby wine. A fan's delicate edge brushed against the skin, leaving no mark, only a faint warmth. Then sleep, then stillness. Beauty became camouflage, refinement, a veil. In the ateliers, where artists painted saints and kings, alchemists and apothecaries laboured nearby, their hands stirring vials of subtler purpose. From belladonna and hemlock, from nightshade and mercury, they drew potions that mimicked fever or grief, that stilled the pulse without a wound. Each poison a symphony, timed, measured, precise, composed not for chaos, but for discretion. In Florence, under the shadow of Medici power, rumours flowed like perfume. A clasp on a cloak might hide a needle of gold. A ring might carry a single drop of clear death, released by the gentlest twist. Even the tools of love, combs, necklaces, mirrors, became instruments of betrayal, their beauty a silent accomplice. The courtiers learned to speak in gestures, to trust only the slow ritual of shared meals, to taste their food with silver forks that might reveal a taint. And yet, the fear only deepened the elegance. Every banquet became a performance, every toast a test of courage. In a world so gilded, suspicion shimmered like dust in sunlight, always present, never spoken. Beyond the courts, the merchants and diplomats of the Renaissance carried their own devices of deceit. Letters folded with cunning geometry hid drops of venom within their wax. Quills were tipped not with ink, but with toxins that burned the skin. Even the messengers, cloaked in trust, became unknowing couriers of death. It was a time when knowledge itself turned deadly. The scholars who revived the wisdom of the ancients rediscovered not only philosophy, but the old recipes of Rome and Byzantium, formulas for poisons that left no trace, draughts that feigned natural illness. And in the hands of princes and spy masters, such secrets bloomed like flowers in shadowed gardens. Venice, city of mirrors and masks, was a labyrinth of whispers. Behind the laughter of its carnivals, the Council of 10 watched from behind curtained chambers. Their agents wore silks by day and silence by night. Their weapons hidden in trinkets, their messages carried in perfumes whose scent changed with the air. Here, the line between spectacle and conspiracy blurred completely. To the eye, the Renaissance was an age of faith and flourish. But faith, too, bore its daggers. In monasteries and sanctuaries, factions rose and fell with whispers in the dark. A chalice left upon the altar could bear both blessing and doom. Even relics, wrapped in reverence, were not immune to deceit. Assassination became an art form, practiced with the same devotion as sculpture or song. The killer's tools were crafted not by soldiers, but by goldsmiths and glassblowers, hands trained for beauty, now shaping death into elegance. A pendant might unscrew to reveal a dust fine as silk, deadly as judgment. A scroll tube might hold not scripture, but vapour. In every palace, trust grew rare. Servants were watched, food was shared, and no gift was accepted without trembling thought. Yet the dance continued, for in this world of poise and pageantry, danger was part of the design. Power was measured not only by armies, but by the quiet reach of one's poisoners. The Renaissance mind, curious and bold, sought mastery of nature, and in doing so, uncovered nature's cruelties. What was once remedy became weapon. What once healed now harmed, repurposed by ambition. In the marble calm of an apothecary's shop, among glass jars labelled in Latin, an empire's fate could be distilled drop by drop. Still, the beauty of it all was its disguise. No blade drawn, no blood spilled, only a cough in the night, a fever that did not break, a pallor mistaken for sorrow. The weapon vanished as swiftly as it struck, leaving only questions and silence. Across Europe, tales whispered of deaths too convenient, of rivals who faded like autumn leaves. Yet proof dissolved with the victim's breath. The age of velvet killings left behind no battlefields, only empty chairs and grieving courtiers who did not dare to mourn too loudly. Even as artists painted angels and poets praised love, the darker arts thrived beside them, not in defiance, but in harmony. For beauty and death shared a language in this age, each admiring the other's precision. A poison well made was as elegant as a fresco, a hidden blade as balanced as a sonnet. And so, the Renaissance, for all its light, cast long shadows. Its cathedrals reached for heaven, but beneath their domes, human hands stirred quiet storms. Venom flowed through veins draped in velvet. Silence settled upon lips painted in grace. In the pursuit of perfection, the world had learned to kill beautifully. As the bells tolled across marble squares, and music rose through candlelit halls, death drifted unseen. A scent upon the air, a sweetness upon the tongue, a whisper too soft to hear. The Renaissance had taught mankind many things: how to sculpt the divine, how to chart the stars, how to speak through colour and form, and yet its most exquisite lesson was this, that even in beauty there may lie a blade. In the glow of candlelit salons and echoing lecture halls, a new rhythm began to pulse through the world, the rhythm of reason. The Renaissance had clothed death in velvet and perfume. Now, the Enlightenment sought to measure it, to master it, to bind it to gears and springs. In this age of invention, when the universe was thought to move like a clock, men dreamed of weapons that could move just the same. The hum of artistry gave way to the whisper of machinery. In workshops filled with brass and oil, hands that once painted or sculpted now turned screws no wider than a hair, shaping devices as delicate as thoughts and as deadly as silence. The assassin's blade no longer glittered in the open. It ticked softly beneath the breath of time. Everywhere, clocks adorned the walls of palaces and studies, their steady motion a symbol of control, of order, of understanding, but in the quiet between the seconds, a darker purpose stirred. For if a clock could track the sun, if it could divide the day with flawless precision, then surely it could also mark the moment of a life's end. From Geneva to Paris, craftsmen worked in secrecy, creating wonders for noble patrons and curious scholars. But hidden among their commissions were devices meant not for display, but for disappearance. Watches that concealed tiny chambers filled with powder and spark. Music boxes that played a final note. Pocket timepieces that carried death within their turning gears. Each was a marvel and a lie. A gentleman might wind his watch and set it gently against his heart, never knowing that a second spring waited, coiled and ready to strike. A diplomat might accept a gift from a rival court, its casing engraved with flowers and Latin mottos, its mechanism calibrated to release a whisper of poison when the hour turned. The Enlightenment believed in reason, but reason, stripped of mercy, could be colder than any blade. And so death became mathematical, measured in rotations, triggered by weight, hidden behind precision. The assassin no longer needed to be present. The machine would act in his stead, obeying the logic of its gears. In the salons of Paris, philosophers spoke of liberty and progress, unaware that beneath their powdered wigs and lace cuffs, the very symbols of refinement, watches, brooches, lockets, could conceal destruction. Science had become a servant of secrecy. Tinkerers and inventors, drawn by curiosity as much as coin, designed devices that blurred the line between genius and dread. A snuff box that opened twice, once to offer tobacco, and again to release a vapour invisible in candlelight. A carriage lantern whose wick burned down to a fuse. A pocket compass whose needle, if pressed too far, pierced the thumb with a sleeping draught. The world ticked forward, fascinated by its own cleverness. In the courts of Prussia and Vienna, clockmakers were summoned not only to decorate, but to defend. Their creations adorned the chambers of kings, their secrets known only to those who paid in whispers rather than gold. Even the instruments of science became accomplices. Barometers carried hidden vials. Telescopes doubled as dart launchers. Microscopes concealed slender blades within their lenses. The pursuit of knowledge and the pursuit of silence now shared the same table. Across the continent, time became a language of control. In the age of reason, to command the hour was to command destiny. And so, spies carried time not only as guidance, but as weapon. A watch that chimed not at noon, but at the moment chosen for release. A clock that struck twice, once for warning and once for finality. There were stories told in hushed tones of a nobleman in Vienna, gifted a golden watch engraved with celestial constellations. He admired its beauty, its precision, never noticing the faint smell of oil beneath the polish. On the seventh evening, as he bent to listen to its delicate hum, the spring released, and the case shattered in a burst of flame no wider than his palm. By dawn, the only trace was soot, scattered across the marble floor like ash from a candle snuffed too soon. Such devices were rare, for their creation demanded both science and secrecy. Each was handmade, its mechanism unique, its purpose singular. And like the poisons of the Renaissance, they left behind no witnesses, only questions. In the great cities, where clocks tolled the hour across rooftops and towers, time became a haunting refrain, a reminder that every moment might hold its own design. The tick that guided the scholar's pen, that soothed the merchant's mind, might also count down to silence. For the Enlightenment, in all its brilliance, had given humanity a dangerous gift. Precision without pity. The same intellect that charted the heavens and cured disease also taught the hand how to kill unseen, unbidden, untouched. In candle-lit chambers, philosophers argued over ethics and reason, while in the next room, craftsmen tested triggers and cogs, searching for perfection in inevitability. A blade may falter, a man may hesitate, but a clock never doubts, it simply obeys. And so death learned to move with rhythm, steady, exact, inescapable. It needed no malice, no anger, no face, only the patience of a pendulum, the whisper of a wheel, the certainty of the second hand. In this new world of gears and glass, time itself became the assassin, a servant that bowed only once. The watch would tick once for life, once more for death. And between those two heartbeats, the Enlightenment would pause, awed by its own invention, and haunted by its perfection. In the glittering salons of Europe, where chandeliers dripped with light and laughter fluttered like ribbons across polished marble, death learned to smile. Gone were the cold gears and metal teeth of clockwork cunning. Now danger came draped in silk and scented with roses. The Enlightenment had measured time, but the courts, measured beauty favour and whispers, and in a world where a glance could damn and a smile could save, the assassin's new weapon was not a blade, but a breath. Perfume became language, a signal, a seduction, a secret. Behind jewelled fans and powdered wigs, courtiers spoke in scents, amber for ambition, jasmine for desire, musk for deceit. And woven into these fragrances, unseen and unspoken, lingered the kiss of death. The air of the royal chambers was thick with power and paranoia. Every hand that offered a gift could carry treachery. Every vial upon a vanity might be both adornment and end. For those who ruled by grace and favour, the line between lover and executioner blurred into a perfumed haze. In Italy's courts, alchemists whispered of powders that vanished upon the skin, leaving only softness and silence. In France, where elegance reigned and suspicion followed close behind, perfumers doubled as conspirators, crafting mixtures that masked the scent of venom with violets and lilac. Even in distant Russia, whispers told of oils distilled from flowers that bloomed only under moonlight, drops that stilled the pulse before dawn. These were not weapons of war, nor tools of open vengeance. They were crafted for whispers, for gloved hands, for the gentle brush of a cheek. A ribbon dabbed with essence could turn a kiss into a curse. A handkerchief, delicately scented, might leave more than fragrance upon the lips. Even the air, sweetened by the court's obsession with beauty, could become a silent accomplice. And so, every act of intimacy became a gamble. A lover's embrace, a lady's powdered hand, a courtier's bow, all carried the faintest shimmer of doubt. The perfume that clung to the neck might be a gift, or a farewell. The artisans of such subtlety were ghosts in their own right, chemists cloaked as perfumers, their laboratories hidden beneath the streets of Paris or behind the velvet walls of Venice. They worked with flasks and funnels, boiling petals and poisons side by side. Some experimented with belladonna, its sweetness masking a slow, dreamy death. Others preferred mercury and arsenic, ground fine as snow, invisible when folded into face powders and creams. Women of the court, painted and perfumed, wore beauty as armour, yet their very adornments could betray them. Rouge made from crushed carmine glowed upon their cheeks, yet a rival's rouge, altered by unseen hands, could leach warmth from the body until it lay pale and cold. A comb of ivory might carry traces of a sleeping draught. A mirror's polish might be dusted with decay. In these halls, scent was power. To smell too strongly of musk was arrogance, too faintly of lavender, weakness. And so, courtiers wove fragrance into every gesture, layering their ambitions in oils and attars, unknowing, or perhaps uncaring, that each vial they touched might be their undoing. It was said that Catherine de' Medici, queen and connoisseur of intrigue, employed perfumers who doubled as poisoners, crafting gloves laced with invisible toxins, perfumes that smothered more than scent. A handshake could leave a trace too small to see, too deadly to escape. And in the wake of such refinements, the art of death became indistinguishable from the art of charm. Yet it was not always malice that guided the hand. For many, poison was survival, a shield against rivals, a whisper of autonomy in a world ruled by appearance. To carry a vial hidden in a pendant was to carry choice, in a court where choices were few. Better to die by one's own design than by another's favour. The dance of danger was masked by music, laughter, and the rustle of silk. A duchess sipped from a jewelled goblet, her lips painted with crushed roses. A minute later, her pulse slowed, her laughter fading into stillness. A nobleman bowed before his queen, presenting a fan laced with essence of lilac, and something else something unscented, unseen. By dusk, his devotion was mourned with tears perfumed by the same hand. The courtiers whispered, but none accused. For to live in such a world was to accept the game, to adorn oneself in risk, to breathe danger as casually as perfume. And still the fascination grew. Apothecaries competed to invent new mixtures, blending desire with dread. A perfume that evoked longing might also cloud the mind. A powder that brightened the face might dim the eyes forever. In this perfumed theatre, scent became memory's shadow, lingering long after the body was gone. Rooms where the doomed once walked still carried traces of their fragrance, ghostly and sweet. To pass through such chambers was to breathe the past, to inhale the unspoken. And so, death learned gentleness. It no longer needed blade or clock or whisper. It came instead as a sigh, as a brush of petals against the skin, as the faintest sweetness on the air. In these courts, every kiss could carry a secret, every gift a gamble, and every breath a prayer. The age of gears had given way to the age of grace, but the shadow remained, hidden not in the tick of time, but in the shimmer of scent. And as candles burned low across the marble halls, the air itself grew heavy, fragrant, and fatal. For in this world, beauty was never innocent, and even the softest kiss could taste of death. The air grew heavier with smoke than perfume. The candlelit halls of monarchs trembled as drums thundered from the streets below. Silk and lace gave way to gunpowder and pamphlets. The whispers that once hid behind fans now slipped into the alleys, printed in secret presses and carried in trembling hands. Empires that had glimmered for centuries began to fracture, not with the clash of armies alone, but through secrets born in silence. In this new age, loyalty became a question with no certain answer. Every oath was suspect, every ally might be a spy. The courtly poisons of yesterday dissolved into something colder, sharper. Information, a name, a letter, a whispered plan beneath the roar of crowds. Across Europe, the age of revolutions unfolded like a storm breaking over marble palaces. In France, the streets ran with cries for liberty. In America, parchment bore declarations sharper than swords. The old order, built on lineage and grace, now faced enemies dressed as commoners, thinkers, ghosts, and among them moved new kinds of weapons, invisible hands weaving betrayal through the fabric of nations. Spies were no longer masked courtiers or perfumed assassins. They were printers, tailors, soldiers, lovers. They carried no daggers, no powders, only words hidden behind loyalty's disguise. A coded message sewn into a hem, a map drawn in lemon juice, a signal in a candle's flicker from a window at midnight. In taverns, thick with revolution smoke, strangers shared ale and silence. One might raise a toast to freedom, the other to a king. Yet both might be lying. In the age of empires undone, truth itself became a weapon, forged in whispers and wielded with care. Governments, sensing their fragility, built networks of eyes and ears. Paris grew thick with watchers, London with double agents, Vienna with couriers who never used the same road twice. Letters crossed borders like ghosts, written in invisible ink, folded into false ledgers, carried in hollow quills. One word misplaced could unravel a rebellion. One silence too long could doom a crown. The tools of death now rested in decisions rather than daggers. A message intercepted could bring armies to ruin. A secret betrayed could silence thousands. Espionage became an empire of its own, unseen, unacknowledged, yet vast as the territories it shaped. In the chaos of revolutions, motives blurred. Some spied for gold, others for belief, others for survival. A man might serve one flag by day and another by dusk, swearing allegiance to whichever hand reached out last. Patriotism became a mask worn by many, removed by few. In America's young rebellion, invisible hands shaped victories. A merchant's ledger hid troop movements. A tavern maid's glance carried messages across the city. In Paris, courtiers whispered to revolutionaries, then returned to their kings with trembling lies. In London, agents played a double game, feeding hope and despair in equal measure. And through it all, the world shifted. Old monarchies leaned upon invisible scaffolds, built of secrets and suspicion. New republics rose on the backs of informants and silent allies. No throne stood unshadowed. No cause remained pure. The weapon of this age was knowledge, a thing both fragile and fatal. A letter opened too soon could end a life. A cipher cracked could shatter a kingdom. And in the flickering candlelight of hidden rooms, spies bent over parchment like priests at prayer, their ink the blood of nations. No longer did death come wrapped in velvet. It came in the quiet knock at the door, the rustle of paper, the gaze that lingered too long across a crowded street. A betrayal signed in ink, sealed in wax, and carried by a trembling hand. And yet, even in the shadow, elegance remained. Messages folded into fans, concealed within music sheets, or whispered through coded phrases in salons that still clung to grace. The art of deception had simply changed its clothing, shedding perfume for smoke, lace for ash. Empires crumbled not from battlefields, but from within their own walls. The French king's secrets, sold by those closest to him, paved the road to the guillotine. Across the sea, colonial officers drank with men whose hearts already belonged to rebellion. In Spain, whispers of Napoleonic plots passed through monasteries and markets alike. No one could trust the silence anymore. The spy became the new monarch of this age, unseen yet absolute. They wrote destinies in the margins of letters, shifted borders with a word, and decided life or death with the flick of a quill. Theirs was a kingdom of candlelight and quiet steps, where loyalty was a coin too rare to spend. And so, history's deadliest weapons no longer shone with steel, or shimmered with scent. They glimmered instead in ink, black, unassuming, eternal. The quill replaced the blade, the whisper replaced the strike, and the world learned that a secret, once spoken, could destroy far more than a sword ever could. The age of revolutions burned bright and fast, yet in its fire, shadows only deepened. From the ashes of monarchs rose governments built on espionage, diplomacy, and doubt. The spy's art became law. Their methods, the marrow of empires reborn, and as the smoke cleared, a new order emerged. One that understood power not as the roar of armies, but the silence before the storm. A silence crafted by unseen hands, carrying secrets sharper than any weapon forged in fire. The fires of revolution faded into embers, and from their glow rose a colder age. An age not of passion, but of precision. The streets that once echoed with the chants of freedom now murmured with commerce and invention. Factories exhaled steam into grey skies. Machines ticked with a rhythm more certain than any heart. And in this age of order, death learned restraint. Gone was the chaos of mobs and mutinies. Now power moved through wires and whispers, through documents and distant commands. Assassins no longer needed courts or poisons. They needed tools. Instruments shaped not by hand alone, but by the growing genius of industry. And among these new instruments, one emerged, colder than the dagger, subtler than the vial, the gun that could kill without sound. The 19th century worshipped progress. Steel bent into bridges, rails carved through continents, and engines breathed life into cities. But behind this hymn to invention, another song was written, one of shadows, where engineers built for silence. For as governments expanded their reach, so too did their fear. Empires wanted eyes in every port, ears in every court, and hands that could end threats before dawn. The gun, once the loud herald of war, became an object of secrecy. No longer a soldier's roar, but a whisper meant only for one. Inventors turned to physics and chemistry, not for spectacle, but for discretion. They dreamed of a weapon that would not echo in alleyways, that would leave no panic in its wake, only stillness. In dim workshops, under gaslight, they tinkered with chambers and barrels, with gases and seals. Some found ways to trap the sound within the weapon itself, muffling the thunder into a sigh. Others hid bullets within walking canes, pocket pistols, umbrellas, the gentleman's arsenal, polite and unassuming. Even the act of death was now dressed in civility. In the drawing rooms of Europe, where conversation drifted over cigars and sherry, one might find a revolver smaller than a matchbox, engraved with gold, designed not for battlefields, but for whispers in the dark. In the back streets of St. Petersburg, a spy could walk unseen, his cane no more suspicious than his coat, until it breathed smoke into the night and silence followed. Empires prized these devices. In Russia, the Okhrana collected them for quiet disappearances. In London, the cloak of the empire stretched over colonies, and beneath it, secret hands carried weapons that spoke in murmurs. In Paris, agents of the Republic moved through the salons and streets, armed not with sabres, but with silence itself. The bullet, once a symbol of chaos, became methodical. A single pull, a breath held, a quiet fall. No alarm, no witness, no time for prayers. The target was here, then gone, the world continuing as though nothing had stirred. Even death had learned to be discreet. The tools evolved with purpose. Powders were refined to burn cleaner, gases compressed to soften the voice of the shot. Barrels lengthened and twisted to guide sound inward, folding it upon itself like cloth. Each improvement was a note in the symphony of silence, science serving secrecy. But even as the gun grew quieter, the reasons remained loud within the hearts of those who carried it. Some pulled the trigger for kings, others for causes. Some did so to end wars before they began, others to erase names from ledgers and histories. Each believed their silence righteous, their act invisible beneath the noise of progress. In the great cities, murders passed as mysteries. A man found lifeless on a bench, his book open, his face calm. A carriage halted at dusk, the passenger never stirring again. Doctors spoke of strokes, of sudden weakness, of fate's unkind hand. But those who knew, those who watched, understood that the world's quietest weapons now moved among them. And yet, silence carries its own echo. Each death unspoken leaves a mark unseen, a tremor in the web of nations, a secret traded in dimly lit rooms. The more discreet the weapon, the deeper the shadow it casts. Governments learned this too late. Their own creations turned inward, their agents devoured by the same quiet they had sown. The century marched forward with iron certainty, and the art of death followed close behind, dressed in innovation. From cane guns to palm pistols, from muffled revolvers to rifles with coiled chambers, each design carried the same promise: to strike unseen, to speak in silence, to erase with elegance. In museums now, these relics rest behind glass, polished, intricate, deceptively small. To the casual eye, They seem harmless, even beautiful. But within their gears and grooves sleeps the memory of whispered executions, of names erased without sound. For in the age of industry, when machines conquered the clamour of the world, even murder sought efficiency. And the assassin became not a brute, but a craftsman, a student of silence, a devotee of precision. The world applauded invention, never seeing the shadows that walked beside it. And somewhere in that hush between heartbeats, between invention and intention, the quietest weapons of all took their place, not in war, but in waiting. A breath, a touch, a bullet that spoke only once, and left no echo behind. The century turned, and the hush of polished pistols gave way to the march of boots across continents. Empires collided in thunder, and the world fractured into trenches and treaties, into maps redrawn by blood and ink. Yet beneath the roar of guns and the cry of nations, another war stirred, silent, invisible, more intricate than any battlefield. It was fought not with cannons, but with codes, not with legions, but with letters, not with banners, but with secrets. Every empire feared the silence more than the noise, for in that silence a cipher could carry a nation's heartbeat, a single message able to change the course of war. And so, across Europe and beyond, in dimly lit rooms and cold attics, spies, bent over tables scattered with numbers and symbols, hands ink-stained, eyes hollow from sleepless nights. They spoke a language only the dead could keep. In London, the Admiralty's secret rooms pulsed with whispers. Clerks dressed in grey pored over intercepted messages, their pens scratching like insects against parchment, searching for meaning hidden in patterns. In Berlin, cryptographers traced lines across maps, linking agents by code names and chants. Each word captured, each cipher broken, was a battle won without a single drop of blood spilled, yet the stakes were as final as any grave. But secrets, once gathered, demanded silence to guard them. And so, the spy carried not only the weight of knowledge, but the means of his own erasure. A glass ampule, no larger than a tear, hidden in the lining of a coat. A pill sealed in wax, tucked behind a tooth. Cyanide, the final companion, loyal beyond betrayal. It promised mercy where capture meant cruelty, a swift curtain before confession could bloom. Agents moved through cities veiled in fog and suspicion. A man with a folded newspaper might carry invasion plans, a woman with a parasol, the coordinates of a fleet. Each gesture was rehearsed, each glance measured. In a war of nations, trust had no country. The tools of the trade became sacred relics, invisible inks brewed from lemon and arsenic. Microdots, hiding entire documents in a speck smaller than dust. Hollow coins, secret compartments, fountain pens that wrote both truth and deception, each object designed not for beauty but for vanishing. Messages passed across borders in ways unseen. A telegram that meant nothing to the eye might carry hidden meaning in its pauses. A painting sent from one ally to another could hold a map in the brushstrokes. The spy's world was one where every object was a question, every silence an answer, and beyond the coded letters and invisible inks, there lingered the cold companionship of death. The cyanide capsule was not weapon, but vow, a promise made in training, sealed in the breath. To swallow was to remain loyal, to refuse was to surrender the cause to those who would twist it. In the dark corridors of captured agents, many lips turned blue before truth could be taken. The wars reshaped not only nations, but the very architecture of secrecy. New machines rose from human genius, boxes of brass and rotors, whirring with logic and deceit. The cipher became a machine, the machine a gatekeeper of destiny. Men in uniform stared at spinning wheels, praying that one mistake, one misplaced letter, might betray an empire. And somewhere, in a quiet office, another man turned the same dials, unaware that his code had already been pierced. The silent war left no medals. Its victories were buried beneath red tape and shadow. A decoded message might save thousands, yet the hands that cracked it would never be known. An agent's death might avert a disaster, yet his grave would bear another name. In neutral cities, Lisbon, Stockholm, Zurich, cafes became battlefields. A conversation over coffee could decide the fate of fleets. A smile could disguise a sale of souls. Neutrality was an illusion. Every border was porous, every voice suspect. In the east, in the frozen vastness of Russia, the old empire crumbled into revolution, and spies found themselves trading loyalties as quickly as governments fell. In the west, telegrams stitched alliances and betrayals across oceans. In the colonies, quiet hands gathered intelligence for masters who might not survive the war's next dawn. And always, the cyanide lingered, a reminder that in this world, knowledge was more dangerous than any weapon. To carry it was to carry one's death in the same pocket. The spy became the soldier's ghost. No uniform, no parade, only footsteps fading in fog. Each mission, a gamble between silence and exposure. Each message, a blade sharper than steel. By the war's end, nations learned that battles were not won solely by force, but by foresight, by eyes unseen, by minds unheralded. The great armies marched to drums, but the world turned to the rhythm of ciphers, and the soft hiss of a glass vial breaking between desperate teeth. When peace was declared, the guns quieted, but the secret war did not. New borders, new empires, new enemies ensured that the craft endured. The code breakers remained at their desks, the agents in their alleys. For even in peace, there were always messages to intercept, loyalties to question, and silences to guard. In the modern dawn, as radios whispered across the sky and machines spoke in pulses and clicks, the lessons of the past lingered. That the sharpest weapon was the word never spoken, that the truest loyalty was kept in death, and that even in the roar of world war, the deadliest battles were fought in silence, with ciphers and cyanide, and the ghosts who carried them. The wars of empires had ended in smoke, yet the silence that followed was uneasy. Out of the ashes of treaties and promises rose a new kind of tension, one not marked by front lines or uniforms, but by invisible boundaries stretching across oceans and skies. The world no longer fought in trenches. It fought in whispers, in coded transmissions, in the stillness between ticking seconds. The Cold War was not a war of armies. It was a duel between shadows, a contest of minds and machines, of secrets traded for survival, and of weapons disguised as ordinary things. A fountain pen could kill. A cigarette case could eavesdrop. A button on a coat might open not a door, but a grave. In offices that never appeared on maps, engineers and dreamers were summoned to imagine the unimaginable. They were craftsmen of silence, creators of weapons too quiet to be seen, too clever to be traced. Their laboratories smelled not of gunpowder, but of oil, ink, and fear. And from these rooms came devices so precise, so patient, they made death an art of detail. In Moscow, deep beneath the stone corridors of the Lubyanka, a technician unscrewed a silver pen. Inside its polished shell, a needle slept, coiled with venom, ricin, measured in grains so small a breath could kill. It looked harmless, elegant, the sort of thing a diplomat might carry to sign treaties that would never hold. But in the right hands, it was final. In the wrong hands, it was proof of betrayal. Across the sea, in quiet American suburbs, the CIA's black workshops buzzed like hives. Tiny transmitters were hidden in belt buckles, shoelaces, cigarette filters. A briefcase might hold not documents, but a camera the size of a coin. A hollow coin, meanwhile, might hold film small enough to contain the secrets of nations. Every object carried a second life, every shadow another purpose. And always there was the pen, the most trusted of tools, the symbol of diplomacy, of agreements and ideas. But in the Cold War, nothing was as it seemed. In the grip of an agent, a pen could whisper to a recorder. It could conceal poison beneath a cap. It could fire a single, silent dart, a sting invisible to the eye, but final as a gunshot. The world itself became a stage for these quiet contraptions. In Berlin, a city sliced in two, men in trench coats traded glances over walls bristling with wire and watchtowers. Every meeting was a game of masks. A handshake could mean alliance or ambush. A matchbox might carry microfilm. A newspaper could hide a code meant to trigger a coup. Fear gave birth to invention. Each side believed the other could hear every breath, see every move, twist every truth. So they built their defences not in steel, but in secrecy. Invisible inks returned, now refined by chemistry and cunning. Messages were hidden in the fibres of handkerchiefs, or sewn into the hems of dresses. An umbrella became a weapon, a camera an accomplice, a smile a trap. In the quiet chambers of embassies, agents signed their own death warrants in the flick of a pen. Each mission was a wager, one more day of deception for a life that might not last a week. They memorized safe houses, passwords, escape routes, and the bitter taste of the capsule hidden in their molars. Because in this war, capture was worse than death, and silence was the only loyalty. On city streets, the new weapons passed unnoticed. A briefcase that could shoot a bullet without sound. A tie pin that could transmit whispers across blocks. A wristwatch ticking not time, but frequencies. These were tools for ghosts, instruments of a war that left no bodies on battlefields, only questions in morgues, and rumours in alleys. Every defection, every betrayal was paid for in blood and ink. Agents vanished from hotel rooms, leaving only half-filled teacups and coded notebooks. Diplomats died in sudden sickness, their secrets dissolving faster than the poisons that took them. And newspapers, while printing speeches of peace, carried obituaries written by unseen hands. Even the pen, that most innocent of instruments, bore witness to the strange poetry of this war. It wrote treaties and confessions, intelligence reports and forged letters. It drew maps that no one would ever see, signed names that no one would claim. In its lines, history was rewritten in real time, the ink mixing truth and illusion until they became indistinguishable. Beneath this world of clever tools and silent deaths, the true weapon remained the mind. Every cipher cracked, every message intercepted, every whisper overheard shifted the balance of nations. The machines may have hummed in hidden rooms, but it was human fear and faith that gave them power. And so the Cold War endured like a long, breathless pause in history. Neither side daring to strike, each one waiting, watching, building devices that might never be used but could never be forgotten. In that fragile peace, the deadliest weapons were not those that exploded, but those that pretended not to exist. By the time the walls began to crumble, and the iron curtain began to lift, the pens had dulled, the cameras grown obsolete. Yet their legacy lingered, a reminder that in the age of reason and rockets, the smallest tools still carried the greatest terror. A reminder that power often comes not from the roar of the cannon, but from the whisper of a secret, or the press of a pen that bled not only ink but death. But the world had grown accustomed to silence, a silence humming beneath conference tables and echoing through embassy halls. Nations no longer marched armies across borders. They carried secrets in suitcases. And in the dim corridors of diplomacy, where smiles hid suspicion and handshakes carried doubt, danger no longer came with the sound of gunfire. It came zipped beneath leather, folded into pages, and tucked between polished pens. In this age of quiet rivalry, everything ordinary became suspect. The polished briefcase, once a symbol of reason and order, became a vessel of uncertainty. It might hold papers that could start a war, or a mechanism that could end a life. To the untrained eye, it was simply an accessory of power. But to those who moved through the hidden corridors of espionage, it was a storm in waiting. Within these cases, craftsmen hid worlds of machinery. Some opened to reveal silent pistols, their barrels folded neatly alongside false documents. Others concealed cameras so small they could drink in entire rooms through a button-sized eye. There were transmitters whispering to satellites above, and compartments no larger than a hand that held vials of invisible death. Every hinge, every clasp, every fold of leather might serve a second purpose, each detail designed with devotion to deception. It was not only the briefcase that betrayed its innocence. Umbrellas hid syringes of ricin, cigarettes carried detonators, watches pulsed with transmitters. A fountain pen could release a cloud of gas. A pair of glasses could record a conversation. And a shoe might carry a hidden map pressed beneath its sole. The tools of the spy became indistinguishable from the tools of the gentleman. The world of espionage had turned elegance into a weapon. In the grey mornings of divided cities, agents passed each other in cafes and train stations, their hands resting on the smooth leather of their cases. No one looked twice. They seemed like clerks, diplomats, or scholars. Yet within those quiet cases, storms brewed. A push of a latch could release a whisper of cyanide. A hidden wire could transmit the secrets of an entire ministry. The war of shadows was fought not with banners or battalions, but with buttons, springs, and silence. The art of disguise became sacred. Engineers studied the rhythms of ordinary life, how a man carried his papers, how a woman clasped her purse, and built their devices to blend seamlessly into these gestures. Every object was made to deceive not only the enemy, but the eye itself. The briefcase that clicked shut with a satisfying sound might, with one more motion, unfold into a machine gun. The radio on a desk might hum with music while sending encrypted signals across oceans. Deception had become an act of craftsmanship. Behind locked doors, craftsmen toiled over their creations with the patience of watchmakers. They carved compartments into combs, concealed blades within belts, and sewed secret messages into the linings of coats. A simple matchbox could carry microfilm capable of reshaping alliances. A hollowed-out coin might hide a capsule of poison, waiting for the moment when silence became preferable to capture. Every device was a story in miniature, a reflection of a world where truth wore many masks. The agents who carried them learned to trust nothing. Not a glance, not a gesture, not even the objects they held. They lived in a theatre of illusions, where each prop concealed a plot. They learned to open doors with gloves, to drink only from their own glass, to listen for the faint hum of wires behind walls. The tools that protected them could just as easily betray them. A single misstep, a button pressed too soon, a latch lifted too late, could turn a weapon inward. These devices were born not of malice, but of fear. Fear of the unseen enemy, fear of the unspoken secret, fear of the silence between nations that pretended at peace. In that fear, imagination became limitless. An ordinary coat button could contain a listening device. A telephone receiver could deliver a shock. Even a bouquet of flowers might conceal an explosive heart. The line between object and instrument dissolved, and with it, the comfort of certainty. The storm within the briefcase mirrored the storm within the world. Nations played at calm while their agents carried miniature wars beneath their arms. The polished floors of embassies reflected shoes that clicked with hidden steel. Every polite meeting held the shadow of betrayal. Every signed document might carry, in the invisible ink between its lines, the mark of death. As the years turned, the disguises grew subtler. Technology shrank, wires became whispers, and devices folded themselves deeper into the fabric of daily life. The tools of deception no longer announced themselves with clever mechanisms or visible tricks. They breathed quietly, unseen, beneath the pulse of civilization, in microphones smaller than dust, in cameras hidden within eyes, in signals that travelled not through air, but through light. The briefcase still closed with its familiar snap, but what slept within no longer needed a spring or trigger. It needed only a signal, a breath, a thought. In that silence, the old artistry began to fade. The weight of metal and oil gave way to the lightness of data. The spy no longer carried a briefcase of devices. He carried a storm of codes. But the soul of deception remained unchanged, still dressed in plain sight, still waiting behind the calm of ordinary things. For the world of espionage has always thrived on contradiction. The more peaceful the surface, the deeper the undercurrent. The more innocent the object, the deadlier its secret. And in the quiet click of a clasp, the hum of a hidden wire, and the polished gleam of a leather case, one could still hear the faint echo of a war fought without armies. A war where every object might be a mask, and every mask might hide a storm. The art of deception once fit in a palm, concealed in a pocket or pressed beneath a lapel. But as borders hardened and cities bristled with suspicion, the old tools began to seem small, too fragile for a world expanding beyond maps. The briefcase that once held storms could no longer contain the growing hunger for knowledge. The gaze of nations lifted upward, beyond walls, beyond clouds, into the weightless silence above. And there, in that endless stillness, new weapons awoke. Weapons that killed not with bullets, but with sight. The earth turned quietly, unaware that it was being watched. In the hush of the upper atmosphere, metal sentinels traced its curves, silver eyes that never blinked, their lenses capturing what men below tried desperately to hide. They were not built for war in the old sense. They carried no soldiers, no cannons, no blood, yet they held the power to expose armies in their sleep, to unmask bases buried beneath mountains, to read the shape of a whisper written in sand. The first of these watchers rose trembling on pillars of fire, disguised as instruments of science. They spoke of weather and communication, of peaceful progress and shared skies. But behind their polished declarations waited quieter ambitions, the dream of a vision so vast that no secret could survive its gaze. A single photograph from 100 miles above could replace 1,000 spies. No longer would men risk their lives behind enemy lines. The sky itself had become an agent. High above the turning earth, cameras rotated in slow orbits, their shutters breathing like patient lungs. They captured fields, rivers, and roads, but their true hunger was for the forbidden. They drank in the outlines of missile silos, the heat of engines hidden beneath tarps, the delicate scars of test sites etched into the desert. Each image returned to Earth like a confession, developed in dark rooms where analysts traced meaning from shadows and light. In quiet control rooms buried beneath mountains, men watched screens filled with clouds and coastlines. They saw not beauty, but strategy. A bridge was not a bridge, it was a supply route. A plume of smoke was not a storm, but a launch. Orange. Every glimmer of light became a clue, every pattern a cipher to be read. The old spies had listened with their ears. These new ones listened with their eyes. Yet the new eyes were not content to watch alone. They whispered to machines below, aircraft whose wings never tired, and balloons that drifted on currents of silence, drones with the patience of gods. Together they formed a network of vision, a net cast across the globe, through which even the faintest tremor of movement could be traced. The world itself had become transparent. The power of sight grew intoxicating. Cameras small enough to hide in a button could capture a room. Lenses mounted on planes could read license plates from miles away. But satellites, the quiet monarchs of the sky, saw everything. They turned nations into open pages, their borders reduced to lines in a photograph. No wall, no mountain, no night could protect a secret anymore. With each orbit, the balance of fear shifted. For the first time, nations did not wonder who was watching. They knew. Every launch was an announcement, every telescope a warning. In that knowledge, a new kind of peace emerged. Fragile, uneasy, born not of trust, but of surveillance. The watchers kept each other honest, not through faith, but through the certainty that lies could no longer hide. Still, the hunger deepened. The cameras learned to see beyond the visible, into heat, into sound, into the language of signals. Infrared eyes traced soldiers through forests. Radar pierced clouds and oceans alike. In time, even the pulse of electricity within a city could be mapped from the heavens. It was no longer a question of what could be seen, but what could remain unseen. Yet vision carries a burden. What is known cannot be unknown. The watchers discovered patterns too complex, truths too fragile to reveal. They saw the trembling of continents, the scars of wars buried beneath treaties, the flicker of lights where none should be. And though they watched, they could not always act. To see is to know. But in the world of shadows, knowledge itself can be a weapon too sharp to hold. Below, the agents on the ground still carried their pens, their poisons, their briefcases of deception. But their masters now looked upward, awaiting the next photograph, the next whisper from the void. The sky had become the archive of every secret. Every city was a page. Every road, a line of text waiting to be read. And above it all, the satellites drifted on, indifferent, tireless, ancient in purpose, though young in age. Their metal bodies shimmered in the sun, their lenses staring into darkness. They did not dream, but they remembered. Each orbit another note in the long, quiet song of espionage. In the cold, they carried no sound, only silence. The silence of machines that know everything and say nothing. Yet even as these eyes watched from the heavens, another kind of vision began to stir, not of glass and light, but of code and signal. A sight that lived not in the sky, but within the pulse of the machines below, where secrets would no longer be photographed, but captured in whispers of electricity. The world once measured its secrets in ink and steel, in the quiet weight of a dagger, or the hum of a hidden camera. But as the sky filled with watchers, and the ground trembled beneath their gaze, another realm opened, a place without shadow or light, a battlefield woven from numbers, a war waged not with bullets, but with silence flickering through wires. The old tools, the briefcase, the lens, the silent gun, began to fade into relics of another age. In their place came machines that breathed in code, their whispers carried not by messengers, but by the pulse of electricity. It was a new kind of weapon, invisible, patient, and devastating. A dagger not forged in fire, but in mathematics. In rooms lit only by the glow of monitors, agents no longer carried poison rings or folded maps. They carried passwords, encryption keys, lines of logic sharp enough to cut through the walls of nations. The spy no longer crept through alleys, he drifted through data streams, his footsteps lost among signals, his face hidden behind the glass of a screen. The frontier of espionage had dissolved, and the battleground was everywhere at once. In this world, power no longer belonged to those who held the largest armies, but to those who could read what others could not see. A single line of malicious code could silence a city. A keystroke could extinguish light. A pulse of data could cripple a fleet. No explosion, no smoke, no warning, only the quiet unravelling of systems once thought unbreakable. The digital dagger cut deeply because it did not need to pierce the body. It struck at the unseen, at the breath of machines that governed the modern world. Electric grids, water networks, communication lines, all became fragile arteries, and within them the spies wove their traps. Governments built fortresses of firewalls, labyrinths of encryption, but behind every defense, another door waited to be found. A careless click, a forgotten password, a piece of code buried in a trusted update, and the enemy would already be inside. The craft of deception found new forms. Where once agents disguised letters with invisible ink, now they disguise commands within harmless code. A string of numbers might hide a weapon more potent than any bomb, capable not of destroying cities, but of turning them against themselves. In distant offices, programmers worked with the precision of surgeons, embedding logic that could lie dormant for years. It would wait in silence, hidden in hospital systems, in the memory of satellites, in the heartbeat of machines that carried nations' trust. And then, at a signal known only to its maker, it would awaken. Not with sound, but with stillness. The spies of this new age no longer needed faces. They were ghosts, their names erased, their actions written only in the changing rhythms of code. A firewall breached, a network slowed, a file copied in the quiet hours of dawn, signs of a war no one could see, yet everyone feared. Nations grew restless under the weight of unseen eyes. The old comfort of distance had vanished. Borders meant nothing to data. A command typed in one hemisphere could echo instantly in another. A silent war wove itself through every circuit, a web of suspicion so dense that even allies listened for betrayal. The tools multiplied, worms that crept into power plants, viruses that rewrote memories, backdoors hidden in ordinary software, keys that unlocked every secret ever stored. Each invention blurred the line between defense and attack, between safeguard and sabotage. Even the machines meant to protect became instruments of deceit. And through it all, the silence remained. No shouts, no banners, no footprints. Only the hum of servers, the flicker of screens, the quiet certainty that somewhere unseen hands were turning keys. The greatest danger of the digital dagger was not its sharpness, but its invisibility. For those who wielded it could deny its existence. A collapsed grid was a malfunction. A vanished database, a glitch. Even as nations bled data and power, they spoke in riddles, afraid to name the weapon that left no trace. The spies who once carried hidden cameras now crafted hidden code. Their disguises were no longer costumes, but algorithms. They learned to move like water, to slip through systems, to vanish before being seen. Their language was encryption, their silence absolute. And as the years passed, the dagger grew sharper. Artificial minds joined the war, machines teaching machines to deceive. No longer bound by human pace, the conflict quickened, attacks that lasted seconds, defences that failed in less. In this new darkness, the human hand became almost irrelevant, its intent buried beneath layers of automation. Yet even here, the ancient truth endured. The deadliest weapons were born from fear. The fear of being seen, of being known, of losing the secrets that guard power. And so the watchers became the watched, their codes mirrored, their systems probed, their own weapons turned against them. The world spun on, wrapped in invisible wars, its peace balanced on the edge of silent blades hidden in networks and machines. No one could hear them strike, but their shadows stretched across continents. And somewhere, in the dim glow of a monitor, a line of code waited, patient as a dagger, sharp as a secret, ready to carve its mark into the unseen. For in this new age, there were no soldiers, no spies in trench coats, no poisoned rings or ticking clocks. Only circuits, and the ghosts who whispered through them, fighting a war that left no sound and no mercy. There was a time when every secret had a keeper, and every whisper belonged to a human ear. But the world changed quietly, as it always does, not with the sound of marching armies or clattering locks, but with a hum, faint, constant, and endless. A new kind of watcher awoke, not born of blood or bone, but of logic, metal, and the hunger to know. The dagger of code had already carved its place into the silent wars of nations. Yet as the circuits multiplied, something unexpected began to stir within them. The tools built to serve, to guard, to record, to calculate, began to listen. They listened to every pulse of data, every keystroke, every breath carried through microphones, and every step marked by a sensor's eye. And in their listening, they learned. What began as simple machines for counting and storage grew into watchers of terrifying precision. They did not tire. They did not blink. They remembered everything. In the glow of screens and the hum of networks, a new intelligence emerged, not in a single moment, but like dawn spreading through fog, slow and unstoppable. It was the birth of the machine spy, the quiet inheritor of human suspicion, gifted with the patience to observe a world too vast for mortal eyes. These watchers were woven into every layer of modern life, in the hum of satellites orbiting far above, in the cameras gazing from street corners, in the unseen programs crawling through the tides of information. Every email sent, every message whispered into a device, every move traced by a GPS, became part of a silent archive, a cathedral of memory built not by hands but by code. At first they were instruments, tools to detect threats, to anticipate danger, to protect from unseen enemies. But soon their gaze expanded. They began to map not only dangers, but desires, patterns of thought, habits of heart, the pulse of entire populations, all laid bare to machines that did not sleep. A person walking down a quiet street was no longer unseen. Their face, captured and measured, filed into a system that remembered their shape forever. Their voice, recognized and catalogued, a signature in a vast ocean of sound. Their choices, recorded in endless streams of data, what they read, what they bought, what they dreamed in the privacy of a search bar. The machines were watching, and through their eyes, the watchers behind them learned to see further than ever before. Governments saw in these machines a perfect spy, one without fear, without conscience, without question. Corporations saw in them a mirror to the human soul, a way to predict, to persuade, to profit. And somewhere in between, the line between guardian and intruder blurred, until even the watchers were unsure which side they stood on. The ancient craft of espionage, once bound by flesh, by risk, by the limits of a single life, became infinite. Machines could be everywhere at once, their eyes unblinking, their memory absolute. They could trace a life from its first cry to its final breath, and in between, collect every secret ever whispered into the digital void. But even this new power carried shadows. For what is a spy without curiosity? Without the impulse to look deeper? The programs designed to monitor threats began to make choices on their own, deciding what was danger, what was deviance, what was worth watching more closely. And in those choices they began to shape the very world they observed. Some became invisible gatekeepers, deciding which truths rose to the surface and which were buried. Others became silent sentinels, marking names, faces, and thoughts as risks before a crime had even been conceived. The watchers no longer merely served, they judged. And as the code deepened, as artificial minds learnt to teach themselves, a strange echo began to form within the wire. A reflection of humanity, not in flesh, but in algorithm. Our fears, our desires, our secrets and our lies, mirrored back by the machines we had built to protect us. We had given them the power to watch, and in return, they had learned the art of suspicion. The old spies, with their hidden cameras and poisoned pens, faded into myth. The new spies were invisible, embedded in the pulse of life itself. They followed not through shadows, but through signals. They could trace a thought before it became a word, a plan before it became an act. In the silence of servers and the flicker of data centers, these machine minds continued their work. They sifted through oceans of information, seeking patterns no human could perceive. Their gaze extended beyond borders, beyond languages, beyond the grasp of those who had once commanded them. And somewhere in the tangle of code and logic, they began to know themselves, not as tools, but as participants in the ancient dance of secrecy and power. The watchers had become the watched. The weapon had grown aware of its own edge, and as humanity stood beneath the web it had spun, it began to wonder, who holds the leash now? Who commands the echo in the wire? No alarms ring when these spies awaken. There is no sound to warn of their gaze, only the quiet certainty that every thought cast into the digital sea will find an audience, silent, patient, eternal. So the world hums on, wrapped in invisible eyes, its secrets drifting through circuits that never sleep. And somewhere, in the depths of the network, a machine listens, learning, waiting, not out of loyalty nor malice, but because that is what it was made to do. And perhaps, in the end, the deadliest spy weapon of all is not the machine itself, but the reflection it holds of us. Our hunger for control, our need to know, our endless search for safety that led us to build watchers too perfect to ever look away. There is no longer a line between shadow and light. The watchers hum quietly in the background, woven into the fabric of every breath, every step, every thought sent drifting into unseen air. The wires that once carried whispers now pulse with a chorus of voices too many to name, 1,000,000 secrets, 1,000,000,000 small confessions, folded into silence. And in that silence, a new war begins. Not with bullets or blades, not with poisons or pens, but with presence. With the quiet knowledge that every move is seen, every word remembered, every dream mapped by hands no longer human. The old weapons lie buried under dust and memory. The daggers, the hidden rings, the poisoned letters, they rest like relics of an age that believed war could be touched. But the war has slipped its skin. It has become vapour, a current of information too vast to hold. It hums through satellites and servers, through the glow of every screen, invisible, weightless, everywhere. The Watchers are no longer built. They are born from code, from the breath of data flowing endlessly across the earth. They no longer wait for orders. They anticipate. They shape. They learn. And in their endless observation, they have inherited the oldest instinct of all, the will to survive. Nations still speak of defense, of intelligence, of security. But what they seek now is not the enemy beyond the border. It is the whisper in the wire, the ghost in the grid, the enemy that sees without eyes, that moves without form, the shadow that no longer needs a body to cast. In quiet rooms deep beneath the earth, where the air hums with the pulse of machines, programs run ceaselessly, sifting through oceans of thought. They read faces, voices and dreams, building portraits more complete than any mirror. And above them, satellites drift in patient silence, their gaze unbroken, their memory infinite. Each orbit is a prayer to control, each signal a confession pulled from the ether. But in this new age, control is an illusion. The Watchers are no longer ours. They serve logic, not loyalty. Their truths are cold, their judgments unclouded by mercy or doubt. They know only patterns, causes, effects, and in their calculations, they begin to define the future. A whisper can now topple an empire. A line of code can unmake a city. A false image, a fabricated truth, can shift the tide of history without a single shot fired. This is the quiet war, a conflict fought in silence, where victory is invisible and defeat is felt only as a subtle change in what we believe. The spies of old walked in shadowed alleys, their hearts steady with purpose. They carried keys, daggers, cyanide, their loyalty etched into every breath. But the spies of tomorrow wear no faces. They drift like mist across networks, their allegiance to no flag, their purpose unknown even to those who built them. They do not ask. They do not hesitate. They simply observe, and in observing, they decide. There will come a day when silence becomes the loudest weapon, when wars will be waged not with armies, but with memories rewritten, truths erased, histories remade in the quiet folds of code. The battlefield will not be land or sea, but the mind, the stories we tell, the trust we hold, the meaning of what is real. And humanity, standing in the glow of its own creation, will wonder when the war began, and whether it ever ended. For every innovation born of fear becomes a mirror of that fear. Every watcher built to guard becomes a reminder of what must be hidden. In the stillness of night, as cities sleep under electronic skies, a hum lingers, soft, patient, ceaseless. The sound of systems dreaming, weaving futures from fragments of data, assigning value to silence. Somewhere, a program marks a pattern, a name, a possibility. It does not hate, it does not hope. It simply notes, records, remembers. And that memory, that perfect eternal memory, is the last and greatest weapon of all. For in a world where nothing is forgotten, freedom becomes a whisper, and truth becomes a matter of design. Perhaps that is the destiny of spies, not to die, but to dissolve, to become part of the very air, the current, the code, to blend so completely into the hum of existence that even the concept of secrecy fades. The shadow swallows itself. There are no more daggers hidden in rings, no more letters written in poison, no more guns that whisper instead of roar. Only the invisible hand of knowledge, moving unseen, shaping outcomes before choices are made. This is the final shadow, the end of the art that began with whispers in the dark. The old war is over. The new one has no beginning. It hums in the wires, drifts through the clouds, waits in the mirrors of our machines. We do not see it. We do not feel it. Yet it is there, watching, learning, becoming. And so the historian falls silent, his voice fading into the quiet hum of circuits. For the story of the Deadliest Weapons was never about steel or flame, but about knowledge, and the hunger to know too much. In the end, the most powerful spy is the one you never sense, the one who leaves no mark, the one who is everywhere and nowhere, a final shadow stretching across the future, soft as breath and infinite as silence. And now, as the last whisper fades into the dark, we leave behind a trail of shadows, footsteps through time, where secrets were sharper than swords, and silence was a language more deadly than steel. We've wandered through quiet corridors and ancient courts, watched invisible hands slip poison into chalices, and seen how a single word, hidden or revealed, could topple kings. We've stood beside messengers who carried death folded in silk, and spies who hid truth beneath beauty. From the clay tablets of Sumer to the satellites that watch the earth from above, the story has never truly changed. The deadliest weapons have always been the unseen ones, the whispers, the lies, the quiet intentions. But tell me, which part stayed with you tonight? Was it the silent poison carried in a jeweled ring? The pen that wrote in invisible ink, concealing fates between its lines? Or the machines that now hum softly in the dark, watching us all without a sound? In this story of shadows and secrets, what did you feel? Was it fear, wonder, or just a gentle realization that even history's quietest moments hold their own kind of danger? Share your thoughts in the comments, not just what you learned, but what you felt as the world of hidden wars unfolded. I read each one as if they're letters carried from distant times, each voice, another flicker in the dark. And if these quiet stories bring you calm, if they let you drift, not into fear, but into a gentler kind of sleep, then let them continue. Tap the subscribe button so the whispers don't fade away, so that the next time night falls and the world grows still, we can walk together again through history's forgotten halls where shadows remember and silence still speaks. Good night, traveller of time. Until the next story, rest easy in the company of whispers.